Hello, I am Dr. Cinema. I analyze and diagnose movies and explain them to you. And I just want to start off with some news about what's going to happen on my channel. Now, I originally was only going to talk about horror stuff, horror movies and such during the month of October since it's Halloween. But with the new It movie coming out next week on September 8th, and I just can't keep my excitement that down for long, I'm going to decide to make September and October horror movie months. So for the majority of videos, if not all videos, are going to be focused on something that is horror related. Now, I really love horror movies. They're my favorite genre, and I hope you like to stick around and watch me talk about all this stuff. Now that's out of the way, I want to do a little different video. I want to do a top 10 list. And the top 10 list is my favorite, not like objectively, but like my favorite top 10 horror movie sequels. Now, horror movies in general have not gotten a reputation of making good sequels. I mean, most slasher sequels are pretty bad, but horror movie sequels can be surprising and they can actually add some more depth and such. So, without further ado, these are my top 10 favorite horror movie sequels. Now, on the bottom of this list, at number 10, The Exorcist 3, also known as The Exorcist Legion. Now, this film is set 17 years after the events of the first film, where a police lieutenant is investigating the murders in Georgetown that have like a satanic motive behind them and show the hallmarks of a deceased serial killer known as the Gemini. Now, the first Exorcist movie is a classic of both movies in general and for horror movies specifically. However, the second Exorcist movie, The Heretic, it was very bad commercially and critically. And it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. So no one was really wanting this third movie, but it proved to be quite the improvement on the second one by a lot, and it's actually a legitimately good horror movie. And I encourage you to check it out if you're the fan of the first one. You can just skip over the second one. But The Exorcist 3 is worth checking out. Now, number 9 on this list, we have Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. Now, despite what that title says, The Final Chapter is actually the fourth movie in this Friday the 13th franchise, which I think has over like a dozen installments now. Now, released in 1987, the final chapter shows Jason Voorhees, full hockey mask form, going up against some teenagers and some bloody gore and fun and legitimate scares. Now, the first Friday the 13th, it's a classic horror movie. However, Jason doesn't actually appear in the first movie, it's his mother. And in the second movie, that's where Jason Voorhees comes in, but he's not in the traditional iconic costume that we all know him from. In the third movie, it's 3D, so not really, a lot of people really like that one. But this movie, besides there of course being sequels afterwards, actually felt like a final and highly satisfying final chapter in this series if this was the final chapter. And it's just a lot of fun and well made. Now, number 8, we have Halloween 2, released in 1981. Now, John Carpenter never really wanted to make a sequel to his slasher classic, Halloween. But of course, he got pulled into doing it, and so he decided to have Halloween 2 take place on the night where the first Halloween movie ended, where people are rushing the main character from the first movie into the hospital, and they're trying to be on the lookout for Michael Myers. It's much more fast paced than the first one. A lot of scares, a lot of violence, and of course, one big finale explosion. And it's really fun to watch. And even though it may not be as good as the first one, because that's a tall order to do, but it's still a very fun and satisfying movie to watch. Now at number 7, the 1997 film Scream 2. Now, the first Scream movie that came out the year before was a sort of a self-reflexive horror movie created by Wes Craven meant to look at the tropes of the slasher films and to use those tropes and criticizing them to the advantage of the killer in the first Scream movie. Now in Scream 2, it centers on the main girl who is now in college instead of high school, where people have become obsessed with the movie based on the events of the first movie, so called Stab. So it's a movie within the movie kind of deal with a copycat killer. Really relates to how horror movies affect the general audiences in real life and what those influences can have both positive and negative consequence wise. And I think it's a really reflective movie of how it relates to real life world. And the same can be next for the next one on our list. Number 6, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the 1994 film. Now, arguably the best sequel of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. This is again a sort of a movie within the movie kind of thing. In this movie, it's a world where, of course, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are, of course, fictional movies. But we see how the effects of playing the character in these movies has affected the main actress in supposedly real life. And of course, Wes Craven has his own role in this movie, and they actually have Freddy Krueger sort of come into the real world. And this movie really again shows the effects of what horror can have on real life audiences and people. And it is again another self-reflexive movie that's very worth checking out. And it's actually well made and definitely looks the best as far as the sequels of the Elm Street movies go. Now, at number 5, we have Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. Now, the first Hellraiser movie was based on a British novella about a group of demons known as Cenobites who when the puzzle box is solved, they arrive and they take that person to their own realm known as Labyrinth or Hell, where they experience pain to the point where it becomes pleasurable for all eternity. Now, the second movie really focuses on the demons, unlike in the first one, which is a little bit more psychological with the humans. But in the second movie, a lot more emphasis on the demons. We actually go into their world, and it's actually really great to look at and a little bit disturbing as well. And it's really great, and it really proves why this franchise, despite its many bad sequels, is actually an iconic franchise in the horror movie genre. And I do recommend you watch Hellraiser and Hellbound Hellraiser 2 back to back, preferably in the same day. It's just really fun to watch. Now, in number 4 on the list, The Silence of the Lambs. Now, Silence of the Lambs is technically a sequel, loosely following the events from the Manhunter movie, even though Dr. Hannibal Lecter is played by two different actors. But, of course, since that technically makes it qualifiable, we've got Silence of the Lambs, where, of course, Dr. Hannibal Lecter helps the FBI detective solve a series of serial kidnappings and killings going around following obese women. And it's psychologically a very well made movie, and probably one of the best serial killer movies ever made. And most of you have already probably checked it out, but just rewatch it again. Number 3 on this list, Evil Dead 2. The Evil Dead franchise is probably one of the few horror movie franchises where it's known for an iconic hero, Ash Williams. However, in the first Evil Dead movie, he is not the Ash Williams that the majority of people would recognize. However, that person becomes recognizable in Evil Dead 2, where, once again, still stuck at the cabin, he loses his hand, has one a chainsaw hand, takes his shotgun, aka boomstick, and starts fighting off dead-eyed demons. And a perfect splatter stick horror movie. It's a whole lot of fun to watch with friends. And now, number 2 on our list, Dawn of the Dead. Now, the 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead, is, of course, a movie classic made by George Romero. May he rest in peace. And actually, it took him a decade for him to make this sequel, but still just as reflective and politically conscious as the first film in sort of like a slightly parody kind of way, but it's just as conscious of the human nature in America as the original was. So please check it out. Now, the number one horror movie sequel, my favorite horror movie sequel, is The Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah, you probably weren't expecting that. Now, we all know the 1931 film Frankenstein was set up in a way where you could make a sequel out of it, but it wasn't until 1935 where we got The Bride of Frankenstein. Once again, setting up the trope that not only will the villain come back from the dead, but of course you can always make sequels out of a classic horror movie. And while, of course, these traits of horror has been used to death, this was the beginning of it, and it was actually done in a very good way, bringing in a new character, putting in some iconic moments, just as iconic as the moments from the first film. It's so well crafted, and I think even the director is trying to make sure this movie was not made as much as possible for some reason. But when it finally came into this, he was like, okay, I give up. This is actually a really good movie. And if the director is impressed by this movie, despite all the doubts and his efforts to try to not get it made, that really shows just how truly great this horror movie sequel is. And those are my top 10 favorite horror movie sequels. So, like I said, September and October, I'm going to do mainly stuff that's horror related. And Dr. Cinema. See you next time.